Good afternoon and welcome to the Glenorchy City Council Open Workshop. So today we will have our acknowledgement to country. Glenorchy City Council acknowledges the Muwinina people as the traditional owners of this land. We recognise the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the original owners and continuing custodians of the land, sky, country and waters of this land, the Truwita. We pay our respects to Aboriginal elders past and present, and we commit to working in a way that welcomes and respects all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's my great pleasure today to put out a welcome to our latest Alderman, Alderman Peter Riddler. I'm sure you'll all join in welcoming Peter back to the council. Alderman Riddler was elected on Monday the 4th of November and was officially sworn in as an Alderman this afternoon. Alderman Riddler has a long history with the Glenorchy City Council as an elected member of over 20 years, and we look forward to his experience and contributions to our community. Joining me in council today, we acknowledge Alderman Justin Stringer, Councillor Molly Kendall, our Deputy Mayor Russell Yaxley. I'm Sue Hickey, the Mayor. This is our CEO Tony McMullen. We have Alderman Stephen King and Alderman Stuart Slade. Unfortunately, we do have apologies today from Alderman Jan Dunsby, Alderman Shane Alderton and Alderman Josh Cockshut. So the usual thing at any council meeting now is to share not only with our aldermen but also with our community what's been going on in the past week at the council. Today is Remembrance Day, where we pause to remember the men and women who have served and sacrificed their lives for our country. At 11 a.m. on 11th of November 1918, the guns fell silent on the Western Front, ending 4 years of devastating warfare. After the Second World War, Armistice Day was renamed as Remembrance Day to commemorate and honour our service personnel who died and suffered while serving in wars, conflicts and peace operations. I'd like to acknowledge and pay tribute to all our current and past service personnel. And it was very enjoyable today to be led by our CEO who did the ode to...
The Ode of Remembrance.
Ode of Remembrance, because we have the lone pine on the front lawn, which is actually been cultivated from the original lone pine brought to Australia. And of course, we have our War Service Memorial. Now, this is very exciting news. As you'll be aware, Council is working towards establishing a youth hub as a dedicated facility to provide safe, welcoming and meaningful space for young people in Glenorchy to gather, to engage in meaningful programs and activities and to connect with each other, but more importantly, to essential support services. It gives me great pleasure to announce that a bequest has been received from the estate of Reginald Webb, a long-time Glenorchy resident, for $250,000. That's $250,000, and it's a wonderful bequest. We're incredibly grateful to the family of the late Mr. Webb and will now work very hard to make the Youth Hub a reality. This follows a visit by some of the aldermen and some of our management team to the Hobart Youth Ark, which is an amazing facility for young people aged between 12 and 25. Over 3,300 people visited the Youth Ark between August 2023 and June 2024, including almost 800 young people from our postcodes within the Glenorchy local area, which shows the real need for a similar facility here. World Kindness Day events. So last Saturday, I was privileged to be part of the Be Kinder walk at Cornelian Bay, which was absolutely fun and fantastic. This Wednesday, on World Kindness Day, Council will host an event on the front lawns that will include the Karate with a Reconciliation art project, the MRC or Migrant Resource Centre team, Everyone Belongs, will represent our diverse youth. GCC is hosting a youth consultation and kindness activity. The Be Kinder group will have a booth making our very first Kindness Council event in Australia. We're the first council to be a Be Kinder council in Australia. The basketball teams will have basketball against racism and that'll be 3-on-3 competition out the front. We'll have a live DJ and a barbecue. The activities will commence around 2 p.m. with the basketball competition at 3:30. We urge anybody who would like to come and participate to be there. I'm having regular meetings with the local Clark MP, Simon Barakas, and this is to discuss local issues within our local area. We do meet, obviously, with members of other flavours in Parliament, and that's a great thing, but this is just a regular check-in, and I think it's important that the public know that we do this to keep that collaboration between state and federal governments. The Tasmanian Transport Museum Heritage Bus Riding Initiative. Anybody into transport heritage loves the Tasmanian Transport Museum, and they are formally launching their Heritage Bus Ride Initiative this week. People visiting the museum will be able to climb aboard a restored vintage, I don't know that, 1971, Bedford bus, sounds old, for a nostalgic journey through local Glenorchy streets and surrounding areas. It's great to see this addition to the Transport Museum services, and for more information, please go to the train and bus ride schedule on the Transport Museum's website. It's a fantastic facility, in particular when you know that everyone volunteers all their time to restore those beautiful parts of our history. The Montrose Foreshore intersection. With summer approaching and more people using this popular intersection, Council has been trying to arrange a meeting with State Growth to discuss and see what possible solutions there may be. We do all recognise that this is a very dangerous intersection. Our elected members have previously raised our concerns with this intersection with the Premier and the Minister for Transport, so we will continue to advocate on behalf of our community on these issues. We're just waiting for a follow-up appointment. The Moona Arts Centre activities, a reminder that the Glenorchy Open and the Molly Tomlin exhibitions open this Thursday at the Moona Arts Centre. This is an amazing opportunity to see artwork from our Glenorchy residents, as well as the sensational artwork by Molly Tomlin. And that is available normally it's only available here at Chambers, so if you need to see it, it's often hidden away from the public, which is very sad, but it will go on display at the Moona Arts Centre. It's part of our council's 60th anniversary celebration, and if you're interested in being at the opening, it starts at 5:30 this Thursday. Now to close, Diwali. It was my pleasure to attend several Diwali events recently, including the All Indians Association Diwali Mela at the Montrose Foreshore, which was supported through Council's Cultural Celebrations grants. And I thank Alderman Slade for joining me there. The association have very generously presented Council with this trophy to thank us for the support. And it was a fantastic event at Montrose. I'd really like to thank the organising committee and all their volunteers for a tremendous job. Thank you. Now, as you know, this is a typical workshop. It runs exactly the same as any of our other workshops in that we don't make any decisions. In a workshop, we're just given information, and in this case, in open workshops, we are sharing those with people. So we're trying to bring down the barriers that we're doing a lot of work behind closed doors, and only stuff that's really has important ramifications like names or contacts and things like that are used for the closed workshops. So it's my great pleasure now to invite Stephen Bresnahan, there he is, thank you, to talk to us on the bushfire management program. And it looks like you have a friend with you. It's not on my list. Yes. Sorry?
Ben Cunningham.
Ben Cunningham. Welcome to Council, Ben.
Yep. Right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd just like to introduce the Brigade Chief of Collinsvale, Ben Cunningham, who's come along today to basically make sure I get things right from his organisation's perspective. My role is as Coordinator of Bushfire Mitigation. So this presentation is basically an overview of what we do and how we're tracking for this summer. So there we go. By context, that's a photo which pretty much all of that bushland there is in the Glenorchy municipality. We have approximately 4,500 hectares, I think, if my memory serves, of dry bushland up in those hills that need management, and they do have a history of bushfire, so it's a known risk. And risk is how we approach all of it. Risk is basically a combination of likelihood and consequence. How likely is it to happen and what will happen if it does? And a major part of my role is understanding the high and extreme risk elements and working out what can be done to diminish that, whether it's diminishing the consequence, diminishing the likelihood, or hopefully both. A lot of mapping and modelling is done in this space. Some, like this one, which I stole off Parks and Wildlife, is quite old, but it is still a useful tool once you understand how it works. In this particular model output, it's showing the big red stripes for the major transmission lines. This model is highlighting assets potentially at risk. And so this really informs how we set our work schedules. There are other models that use other philosophies, other approaches. We try to keep across them as best we can. It's certainly a space which has had a lot of activity in it of late. There are a lot of tools in the toolbox for diminishing risk. And this photograph, which was taken at a fuel reduction burn, I think that might be Orford, to be honest, gives us a good picture of everything that can be done in that space. The obvious one is the prescribed burning. We can see that underway, and that's happening in the otherwise basically unmanaged native bushland. A bit further in, and you've got fire breaks, you've got access, you've got fire trails and things, that built things that sit between the bushland and people's homes. Moving a little closer, you've got people's backyards and just over the back fence. So this is where land and asset management, landowner education, and community support comes into place. And then further in, you've got the houses and buildings themselves. So design, materials, planning approvals, building standards, and all of these contribute towards diminishing the bushfire risk. So for council, we have 5 major areas. We've got our statutory planning responsibilities. We have the land and asset management for council's bushland. We have regulation and enforcement roles under the Local Government Act. We have community resilience projects that can be worked through, and we also have our responsibilities under emergency management. Local government has major roles, particularly in the recovery and return to normality phases for a bushfire event. So my role mostly sits within this, but it does feed through into all the other aspects. Of late, our project, we're a small team, there's 2 full-time equivalents. We've been developing expertise, we've been establishing agency and network, sector networks, and we've been moving from rehabilitating or rebuilding our assets like fire trails and fire breaks into getting them up to spec and just turning it more into a maintenance program to keep them as good as they need to be. Fire trails is one of our main highlights. This is the access that lets people like Ben get up there to chase the fire when it's happening. Most of our fire trails are either within or on the edge of Wellington Park or in the NRPS Reserve, often referred to as Goat Hills. We've got about 45 kilometres. All of our high priority trails, as sitting right now, are in very good usable order. They're ready for summer. Medium priority trails likewise, and almost all of the low priority ones are passable or better. By low priority, these are little spur tracks. They might be little dead ends or not actually going anywhere critical. So we're at the point now where it's our low priority fire trails, which we're starting to work on because everything else is up to standard. And most of the network is now year-round usable, whereas previously they would have to be shut through winter. We use the standards that the Parks and Wildlife Service use. It is effectively the same standard that much of Tas Fire Service uses. It matches the fire trail with the type of vehicle that can use it. So it's a very good pragmatic approach. And for us, auditing and testing includes things like brigade familiarisation tours where we say, this track we should fit a large pumper up, a category 3. And they go say, well, we drove one up there, it works. So it is a very easily measured process. And we have maintenance programs, audit triggers, and all our service levels are in place so that we know what to do and how to program it forward. This is a picture that I took only a few days ago. It's the top end of the Chapel Fire Trail. A lovely new fresh surface on it, just gone down. Previously, it used to be an elongated rock pile. It was difficult. It was hard for a fully laden vehicle to get through. It is now properly up to spec and ready to go. So as we're going, we're just getting each little difficult bit up to spec. Breaks and vegetation management. So this is the slashing, pruning, mulching. It's typically done on our bushland around assets and homes. It's a cyclic program. Starts off in spring to early summer, depending on how the seasons are going. We respond to the growth rates and we are informed through the same standards that are used for building in bushfire-prone areas. A big focus for us is the nearby safer place at Collinsvale, which is just at the hall adjacent to the fire brigade emplacement, and making sure that that is up and absolutely up to spec just in case. Again, audits, reviews, we're out there inspecting on a regular basis. Fuel reduction burning. We rely on the Tasmania Fire Service's bushfire risk unit as part of the fuel reduction program. We have a long history since that program was instigated, working alongside them to get burns done in the Glenorchy management area. We are also working to develop our own internal capacity at a smaller scale to complement that. This will also support ecological management. It has the potential for integrating Indigenous practitioners, which is something we're very keen on. And we collaborate a lot particularly with City of Hobart, who have similar programs of their own. That is a photograph of skill acquisitions underway. That's the other half of the bushfire mitigation team working alongside City of Hobart at one of their burns just recently, getting his skills up and making sure that he's trained properly. Risk monitoring. So again, another modelling output. This was some modelling that was produced in 2014 as the Tas Fire Services Bushfire Risk Unit was being formed. And it was looking at where the suburbs were that were greatest at risk, given the history of fire and the likely fuel loads through those hills. And the areas that it shows as being greatly at risk are the ones that logically you'd think would be the ones. So it's the bush fringe suburbs, particularly those suburbs that go up into the hills. So Collinsvale, also further south, Ferntree, South Hobart are often considered very much at risk. As time goes on, now on this one, the little hashed black lines, the little blobs of that, those are burns that have happened since 2014. And the colours are representing how that risk from before has been dropped. So for us, we're looking and saying, okay, Glenorchy, Rosetta and everything, those have dropped down, but Collinsvale is still in the orange. So it's an area of concern. But because the fuels are reaccumulating, regrowing all the time, this is not a static measure. As time goes on, everything will regrow, the fuels will build up. We need to have an ongoing attention to this. So a lot of that ongoing attention is structured through our strategies and plans. We have an overall bushfire mitigation policy. It's been in place for 3 to 4 years now. That policy sets a strategy, and that strategy also works in with the strategy set by the Wellington Park Management Trust, who have their own legal responsibilities under the Wellington Park Act. Those two documents are what we build our programs and our work priorities out of, particularly the actions coming out of Wellington Park. Because the NRPS Reserve the Goat Hills are right next to it, then those two plans work very closely together. And what we do in NRPS also informs what we do, Poymina, Roseneath, Nose Ridge, Runter Crescent, those smaller but still important patches of bush reserve. So the review, we're at the end of the third 3-year block of the mitigation strategy. We're assessing how we've gone against our objectives. We're freshening up the text. We're making sure the legislation and policies are still up to date. It'll be an evolution rather than a revolution, and that process is underway, hopefully to be completed later this year. That's what a 3-year schedule looks like. Probably the most important thing to carry away from this is that it works at different levels. We've got the responsive cyclic seasonal works, we've got individual projects, and then we've got the things we need to do to make sure we retain or improve our capacity. So staff, resources, planning, that side of things. Broader, we know that the TFS is working on a bushfire risk management project for the Greater Wellington Range. We are contributing to that. There will be a meeting in the next few weeks that the Test Fire Service are organising to really get that underway. So while that work is underway, we're just holding off on any new work on NRPS or our other plans because all those documents need to be integrated. They need to be able to work seamlessly together. And so rather than reinvent wheels and waste time, we're just going to take our lead from what's happening with the TFS project and build ours on top of that. We collaborate a fair bit with our colleagues in state government, other local governments, NGOs. Tasmania Service in particular, we spend a lot of time working alongside them. They're a big and diffuse organisation and different sectors we go to for different things. So Bushfire Risk Unit, they are the ones delivering the fuel reduction burns. Bushfire Ready Neighbourhoods and Community Fire Safety, they are the ones with the community messaging and the social resilience that we can lift off. They do a lot of work in the incident messaging too, which feeds through to our work in emergency management. And we also work with the district staff and the brigades, including Collinsville, Claremont, Wellington, and to a degree with Lena Valley, who do come a little bit northward sometimes. Local governments, we're friends with all of the councils around us. We all talk, we all know who each other is. We also assist Local Government Association of Tasmania from time to time. And a lot of this is done through a statutory committee called the Hobart Fire Management Area Committee. That's formed under the Fire Service Act. It brings in local government, Tas Fire, Parks and Wildlife, the forest industry, and several other key stakeholders such as Tas Networks. Brings us all together. We all discuss our different processes, our different risks, and we produce a plan that encompasses all of that. And that, again, is another key document that we work to. Of late, we've been tying ourselves closely with the Southern FMAC, who are dealing with most of the same issues and most of the same people. And it's all overseen by the State Fire Management Council, which then they report up to the Minister for Police, Fire and Emergency Management. So here and now, what we're expecting. The El Nino Southern Oscillation is trending towards La Nina, which is generally cooler and more humid. Indian Ocean Dipole is one of the other big drivers of our climate. That's neutral. And the Southern Annular Mode, which is the latitude that the high pressure systems come through at summertime, is also neutral. This means we have a very low idea of what to expect. It's not signalling a massive year of blow-up fire weather, but it is going to be warmer than average. Rainfall outlook is mixed, but it is looking drier. So that's a key thing for how we're, particularly our fire break work and things, we're working towards potentially an earlier start this year. So the recent rains that we had a month or so ago, there hasn't been much follow-up to that. And so we're getting back to quite below average soil surface moisture levels. The deep soils have stayed very dry throughout. So we were expecting medium to high growth rates. It's towards the more medium end. Some of the comments I'm getting through from some of my colleagues is that we're not getting a massive spring brush, but we are getting some of it. From the fire service, they say expected bushfire risk is normal. Normal means we could get some total fire ban days. We could potentially get 1 to 5 of them in a typical normal year. But again, it's a low reliability year from the model. So we will be prepared, but we're expecting we could get some fire weather this summer. Program works, most of our pre-summer works are already well underway. We have scoped in that we may need to do extra works, particularly early in the new year. Planned burns, there are no planned burns from the Tas Fire Service this spring, but they are working towards some in the Collinsville area, hopefully for next autumn. There's still some work to be done there. And we are continuing our monitoring across there and feeding that information back to the planners at the Tas Fire Service as we go. So from a more community perspective, we recommend that the bushfire.tas.gov.au website is a place to begin to learn what you can do for yourselves to build your own resilience. It's a pretty comprehensive website. You should be able to find something in there to help you make a start and to understand what your risk exposure is. Fire bans, fire permits, burn registrations. For those that do burn off, please register. There is an application button there on the Tas Fire Service website. It's pretty easy to navigate to. Strongly recommend that if you are putting some smoke in the air, register, and once the permits come in, get your permit. A big reason for doing that is that the slightest puff of smoke in the air and people will be phoning in 000 from everywhere that they can see it. So this helps the fire service get on top of what is a perfectly safe backyard burn versus something they need to get a red truck out to real quick. Also keep an eye on the fire danger rating forecast. So again, another screen grab from the Tas Fire Service website. It will give you maps or charts for the day and the following 3 days afterwards. So again, something that I use very often in working out what works we can do in coming days and when to expect potential total fire bans and potential reserve shutdowns if the weather is going to be that bad. This is another really good website to bookmark and just keep an eye on. And the last one, Tas Alert. This is absolutely vital to keep an eye on that. As bushfires pop up, they get registered, they get listed here. There will be links through to extra information. If you're going out and it's a bit of a blow-up day, there's a bit of wind and it's a bit warm, have a look and see what's going on out there and keep it. I believe there's an app for this too, isn't there? Yes, there is. So getting the app on your phone is a great idea. And that photo was only just taken a few months ago of one of our fire vehicles halfway up Mount Wellington in the snow. So we deal with all sorts. It was a lovely day though. Anyway, that's all I have to bring in. So I suppose open to questions at this point.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. That was another brilliant presentation. It's comforting to know that we've done as much as we can in the event of some horrific drama happening this summer. Can I ask the elected members, do we have any questions for Stephen? Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you. You mentioned about the connection to the Aboriginal community in terms of the burnings and learnings that we can probably engage in. How far along are they, and are they something that you're wanting to sort of improve and include?
It is something that I'd like to improve. I'm cognizant of the fact that for it to be of value all around, it needs to be community-led.
Yep. I
can't come in and say, I want the Aboriginal community to come and do this.
Yep.
So I do know several practitioners. We've talked with them. It's a slow process to do it respectfully, but that's how I want to proceed. If you as elected members are contacted by anyone within the community saying they would love to be able to, then I'm more than happy to drop what I'm doing, talk with them, take them up the hill to show them. So yes, it's an ongoing process, and it's not one I can push very fast because that takes the respect out of it.
Yeah. Yep, that's great.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Councillor Kendall.
Thank you for your excellent presentation yet again, Steve. I sometimes get asked from community members where their nearest safe space is, and maybe this is thinking more generally in terms of other emergencies, but if I'm correct, you can set me straight hopefully, it depends on the emergency, and that's a sort of wait and see until
That's
the
right.
emergency based
So
on where it is.
a nearby safer place is a spot of last resort. For most people in the Glenorchy municipality, they're way outside where a bushfire is going to impact because we have such a hard edge between the city and the bushland. So, for instance, someone that lives in Austin's Ferry, if there's a bushfire on, they say, oh, we need to go to a nearby safer place. Well, you wouldn't go to the Collinsvale one because you've got to drive up a bushland line road to get there. They are better either staying put or finding like coming into Northgate for air-conditioned comfort or something along those lines. So when an incident is on, and again, Ben, if I've got this bit off correctly, if a nearby safer place is being advised, it will be coming out of their incident management messaging. They will also be messaging out that there may not be any people there to support them. It is not a recovery centre. So let's say that there was a fire on, council will be standing up our emergency management team. We may be asked to open a recovery centre. That will be different to a nearby safer place. And that recovery centre is where we'd actually like to be able to advise people to come in. So for the nearby safer places, they would be advised on a case-by-case basis. If you are in the area of Collinsvale and you are stuck, here is a bolt hole that will be less unpleasant than everywhere else. But it is still no guarantee.
There has been quite a few questions from the local Collinsville community about evacuation centres. And I don't think council advertise or have a evacuation centre. But people in their bushfire planning like to have in their mind that this is the place that they need to go if they need to leave Collinsville or Glenmust. So previously it was the VEC, that's not council owned now. And I think there's been some Moona Art Centres
Well, I mean,
mooted, but I don't think you have an advertised evacuation centre.
Not advertised, but we've got Moona Art Centre, we've got Glenorchy Community, Moona Community Centre, and potentially the Moona Sports Centre if required, if it was overflow. So that what's been identified in the Emergency Management Committee per se, but not refuge. They're somebody's got a safe place, but a refuge, yeah. So it's beyond a safe place, then those are the places have been identified.
I think, there might be, I know it's a decision to be made by council at the time, but it might be worth advertising to these people, these places are the evacuation centres. I suppose it makes it difficult when you haven't got just one nominated centre, you've got multiple, and you might only open one of those. So.
Yeah, they're all within a stone's throw of each other, but they are, that's the ones that have been decided on at this stage, as I understand it.
People are developing their plans in preparation for bushfire season. That when they do those plans, I think they'd like to have some, pre-knowledge of where they're likely to end up if they have to leave Collinsville.
That's a good point, thank you. Yeah. Do either of the officers any of the officers want to respond to that?
So my understanding is Collinsville has been an evacuation centre for a number of years. Whether in a bushfire we would want to use it, again, it depends on the circumstances at the time, because it may or may not be suitable, it may or may not be accessible given the roads to get to.
I wouldn't have thought it would be suitable.
No. It depends. I mean, when we say evacuation centre, you also need to consider it needs to deal with floods and other emergencies. So it's not just for bushfire. So you have to cope with multiple potential issues. So again, for bushfire, we're concentrating on Moona Art Centre and Moona Community Centre, and we are actually working with feedback in terms of fit out and equipment for those things to be able to stand up.
Okay, any other elected officials? No? Is there anyone from the floor who would like to ask a question? Thank you, George. Mr. George Burrows.
I have a question about, you were talking at length obviously about City Council. I noticed no mention of the Derwent Valley Council, bearing in mind that 90 or more % of fires were coming from that direction, and being probably one of the few here that experienced directly the 67 fires moved to Granton. late in 60s.
Yeah.
And saw the absolute devastation through that area. Now it's become substantially more urbanised. So I wonder, the question is why you're not working more with Derwent Council, or maybe you are.
We are working with Derwent Valley Council, and they're on the same fire management committee. Like I said, that brings it all together. I suppose the reason I was talking so much about Hobart is that they have an entire bushfire management team that is out there managing risk all the time. I don't think Derwent Valley has that same alter level capacity. They are still very active in the emergency management side of things, and they have got excellent people there for that. But I think, and I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think because Derwent Valley doesn't have large bushland reserves that are owned by the council the way that Hobart and Glenorchy and Clarence do, their resources are apportioned differently. So part of the reason my job exists is to do that land management side. But in terms of our working with them, yes, we do. We cross paths quite regularly through the committees and things. We know who everyone is in the Zoom. We phone each other up when there's a need. Same with Brighton, same with Clarence. So we try to be as active across the board.
On a micro scale, has there been any consideration about the banning of certain species within urban Glenorchy, such as large gum trees?
Not as such, but for anyone that is building a new home or putting an extension on a house, basically anything in a bushfire prone area, which is defined under the planning laws, that will trigger a development application will require a bushfire hazard management plan to be prepared by a qualified individual. Now, there's a big list of them on the planning section of the Task Fire Service website. They have not just building standards, material standards and things, but they also have garden and landscaping standards as well to make sure that whatever new house goes in or extension goes in, the garden itself is not going to be a risk. And so for basically any property in the bushfire prone area that triggers a development application, there are checks and balances on what vegetation can be there. And that's done through planning.
But nothing for existing.
Nothing for existing.
Concern.
So, council's role in this, planning rules are not retrospectively applicable. We can provide
Some
we can provide advice, and if someone were to phone me up and say, is this a risk? Either I can take a look, or one of our hazard abatement officers that are authorised under the Local Government Act for bushfire hazards, they can take a look. If there's a need, there is a pathway to get that done. But a single gum tree in someone's backyard is not necessarily the fire risk. It might be other things that are less visible. So we really need to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
But you're not doing that.
It's not part of my role to do that, but I would respond to any request.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, sorry, could you state your name and suburb?
Rowena Clark, Glenorchy. We're adjacent to the Wellington
Right?
I was speaking last year to Hobart City Council and met some people from their fire management unit, and they were offering a service where they could come out and have a look at what vegetation is around the house. And because I'm even walking, they couldn't complete it. I wasn't in the right area. Does as far as what he was saying is that the type of tree, some are flammable, but it depends where it's located, whether sometimes it might actually be better to leave the tree there because it's a windbreak and it's not spread. To get that sort of advice for a Glenorchy area, is it yourself or is it fire surface?
I'm happy to respond to any request along those lines. If I need backup, I can call for someone in a blue shirt to come and help if needed. But It's not something that I've had a lot of requests for, but everyone that I've had, I've responded to. So we will, if you want to get in touch through the normal channels, I can come out and visit. Or if you can either leave me your phone number now, and I'll call you in the next few days. But if you wanted to do it like an email through to the general inquiries email so that it gets logged and onto the system, and just put attention to my name, and it'll turn up. And then I've got an entire computer system making sure that I call you back.
Thank you. That's very good. Eddie, you don't have a question? Okay, thank you. No other questions? Well, just on behalf of the council, thank you again, Stephen, and thank you, Ben, for coming along as well. It's good to know that we're doing everything we possibly can. So I appreciate that. Right, now we've got the next item is a very interesting one. It's going to be delivered by our CEO. It's War and Peace? Yeah, War and Peace saga on the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our CEO, Tony McMullen, who has been heavily invested in this story. And I urge you to pay attention because it will surprise you. Looks like a light rail.
Thank you, Mayor. So really, this is about telling the story of what the history has been so far of this proposal, and then where we're at the moment, and where we probably need to head in future. I'll try not to be too controversial. So, as I said, we'll look at some background. Where are we now, and what are the next steps? That's actually the first one of the early movies. It was shown in a French cinema, and it was a train coming into a station, and the people in the audience jumped out of the way because they were concerned the train was coming towards them. Where do I point?
At me. Here.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Can you just move it on your screen? Thank you. Good start, Tony.
Thank you.
Yeah, that works. Things frozen.
Bear with us while we use our technology. Let's hope it doesn't take as long as the Southern Transport. Northern Suburbs.
This is a metaphor.
Yes, it's a metaphor.
Craftily built into the presentation.
Yes. Twists and turn of how not to get a project started.
Yeah.
Do you want to see if it works again?
We'll go back. So there have been lots of studies on this. There have, in fact, been lots and lots of studies, and that is not all of them. I shudder to think how much all of those studies over the years have cost. It's obviously impossible to go. I have done a bit of a summary of each of those, but it's impossible in the context of this presentation to do that justice. So what I've done is a bit of a timeline, and really, I guess where we started was the battery rail proposal from Ben Johnston, associated with the Glenorchy Rail Group. I can't remember the name of the group, but that really kicked off. There was a lot of, I think, lobbying of government at the time. That led to some work being commissioned, government commissioned ACIL Tasman to do a cost benefit analysis of light rail along the corridor. And we define the corridor to be, at this stage in the process, to be between basically Macquarie Point and Bridgewater Bridge at Granton. Around 2011, also the then Southern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy defined a densification area, which we'll see later on, along the rail corridor, identified areas where there should be denser development supported by improved public transport. In 2012, and you can see that the ACIL Tasman study had a negative cost benefit. It basically said it didn't stack up. Similarly, ACOM did a peer review in 2012, and they agreed that light rail wasn't viable and that there was a need to work on the preconditions for such a system. For example, look at pricing parking, look at ways to look at planning to increase densification along the corridor. Then in 2014, there was a Riverline study which also focused on creating the right conditions for light rail. Around the same time, the rail line itself became non-operational between Macquarie Point and Bridgewater because of the introduction of the Brighton intermodal hub. Then in 2015-16, ERA investigated a range of infill pilot sites along the corridor. So there are a number of sites within Glenorchy and also in the city of Hobart that were identified for exploration as potential sites for residential densification. And so that essentially occurred at that time. Then in 2016, the GHD public transport corridor study, which was again Hobart and Glenorchy, I believe, with state government funding, identified the potential of public transport along the corridor to catalyse urban renewal. Around the same time, the government also announced that it would preserve the rail corridor and stop it from being compromised as a rail corridor. And then in 2016 also, the newly formed Infrastructure Tasmania did I guess you'd call it a synthesis of some of the past studies and again indicated there was a need to create the right conditions. So looking at parking controls, looking at land use controls along the corridor. It's only half the story. So then in 2018, in the lead up to the signing of the Hobart City deal, Council made an explicit decision to support the City deal, a draft City deal proposal, including activation of the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor, as well as the development of a growth strategy for the corridor. In February 2019, we all trotted down to the airport and watched Scott Morrison's plane land, and his limousine come up, and he signed the deal along with the four Inner Hobart mayors and the then Premier, I think it was Premier Hodgman at the time, and the City deal actually had within it a statement that the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor would be activated within between 5 and 10 years of the signing of the deal. Following on from that, the PricewaterhouseCoopers transport mode study was done, and obviously at that stage there was a lot of discussion around light rail versus bus rapid transit versus trackless trams. So those three modes were looked at by PricewaterhouseCoopers. Effectively, they said that the two front runners were light rail, but which would have more land use uplift because of the bigger vehicles, but bus rapid transit was going to be considerably cheaper, and albeit with less land use uplift. And so the government pretty much from that time on has been saying that that's their preferred means. And we did fight the battle for a while with, rather we could see that we were not getting any traction, no pun intended, with either state or federal government. In 2020 also, Fission produced what must have been a check on those figures, and they had light rail coming in at 685 million then, and bus rapid transit coming in at 512 million. Then in 2021, Department of State Growth commissioned a study by GHD into the condition of the corridor. They looked at issues like the need to replace rail, the need for substantial bridge repairs, the drainage upgrade required for, I think it was 12 sections of the line, and also identified the fact that with increasing rail safety standards, there were areas where the corridor wasn't of sufficient width. In 2022, there was a change of federal government, and Labor came in and they indicated that they would honour the city deal. But when I asked them, excuse me, I'm getting emotional. I've got a sore throat. When I asked them whether in a meeting whether that meant supporting the activation of the corridor within between 5 and 10 years of the signing of the city deal, they said no, it means honouring the funding commitments made to date in relation to the corridor, which we'll get to later, which fall a long way short of activating the corridor in any way, shape or form. So it's fair to say at that point, really, that federal Labor had its own ideas for national urban policy, and really it was at this point that probably the city deal became a legacy commitment, and it's fair to say that that's remained the case today. That really, I think city deals were actually a Malcolm Turnbull thing, and then even once it changed to Scott Morrison at federal Liberal government level, there was some momentum came out of things, and then with the change to Labor, further momentum came out. So we're really left with a legacy commitment now. Then I'll jump to the Cox Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor growth strategy. This was really finalised, close to finalised in about August 2022, and took a long time to, let's say, it withered on the vine, and they had to do substantial re-edits because of the need to recognise that a lot of the research had passed its use-by date by the time they were ready to release it. So it finally saw the light of day in April 2024. And in 2023, I know I'm jumping back in time, but the Keeping Hobart Moving plan was prepared, which brought together a whole range of major transport infrastructure projects into one plan. And the idea of that was defensive, which was to meet head on a federal government review, national review of capital funding for major projects. It was quite successful in terms of being able to hold on to funding for Tasmania. Again, I'll get into that a bit later, but what we saw here was that this plan identifies not just a northern corridor, but also a southern and eastern corridor. And they have, I guess you could say, vagued out the timelines. And so I guess the question to me, and it's one, having been involved with this process for a long time, you do get a little bit dispirited, but I don't think they've been kicking the can down the road. I think when you look at the case for some sort of activation of the corridor is really makes it imperative. We're dealing with Greater Hobart congestion. The Department of State Growth manages a mature road network. They're not looking to build new arterial roads. We know about the costs of urban sprawl, the need for more people to live closer to services, to reduce car dependency, and also to provide a catalyst project for more housing, which is badly needed at the moment, as well as the overall imperative of reducing emissions. We've got to weigh that all up against the fact that we're talking about a $500 million plus project. So where is the money going to come from is the question. So where are we now? I think there are three pieces of work that need to be done. There's the transit solution stream. Getting emotion again. Which is the need to prepare a business case and design the transit solution, seek the funding, procure and then deliver it. On the land use side, what we're thinking about here is obviously what development we can encourage along the corridor either side. And for that we need to be looking at what is the development pattern we need, what is the infrastructure needs analysis. So are our pipes at the moment, is our trunk infrastructure the right size to deal with this increase in density? Are there any other constraints from an infrastructure point of view? What heritage values do we need to protect as we look at development along the corridor? What is the issue from a site capability assessment point of view? For example, we've historically had flooding issues in Derwent Park, and we also know about the fact that these areas are, could have been historically involved with industrial land use, and many are still, and raises the question: should they be redeveloped or left as is as a central reservoir of jobs? Is there any land value capture that we need to do to help fund the project? And of course, to get land use planning ready, we also need to get some sort of amendment through the Planning Commission. And then the third stream, of course, is change management, because we're talking about needing to enlist the support of a lot of people that live or work or have interests within the corridor. So let's first look at the transport solution. I'm not coming up with the answer on the transport solution, I'm just telling you where it's at the moment. So, as I mentioned, the City Deal commitment of activating the corridor between 24 and 29 is unlikely to occur within this timeline. In terms of the funding commitment I mentioned under the City Deal, the federal government has committed $38.5 million to the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor, but funding was reallocated slightly in the May 2024 federal budget to the Hobart Public Transport Infrastructure Planning Project, which is effectively creating that bus rapid transit plan for not only the north but also the south and eastern suburbs of Hobart. So it spreads it out a bit. And I think they're also looking at using some of that money to look at the transport planning around the stadium proposal. State growth is still looking to prioritise Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor, and they'll need to be working with Hobart and Glenorchy City Councils going forward in relation to this. And they're looking to reactivate a steering committee that hasn't met for some time as the means to do that. State growth is going to use the funding in that $38.5 million to complete all the planning work required to obtain Australian government support and future funding to fully construct the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor. They believe that the project and the objectives that they have are well aligned with the federal government's policy priorities. And they're in the process now of developing a strategic business case for a rapid bus network across Greater Hobart, including along the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor, plus, as I said, the connections to east and west, east and south. So this is from the, thank you. this is from the Keeping Hobart moving plan. You can see the important thing to note from this, I know it's a small diagram, the important thing to note is the action takes place largely within that inner circle. So really there is a focus on urban renewal within that inner circle.
Tony, is it confusing? You're talking about 30-year plan there. That 38 million, what's the time frame for spending that for the project itself?
The 30 years is the 30-year Greater Hobart plan.
Yeah, but that 38 million for federal government funding, what's the time frame to get that done? We'll get to time frames shortly. You could say probably fairly open-ended, but it's certainly, it is in the 10 plus years. So this is actually taken out of the Keeping Hobart moving plan. And this is just tuning in, this is what I call the amoeba diagram. It looks very close to an amoeba, but you can see there's if you like, a Y plan for rapid bus transit within Greater Hobart. So you've still got the northern, I'll see if I can point at it with a pointer. Just a pointer. I don't think I can do it. You can see, if you can just see where Hobart is in the middle of the intersection of those three lines. It's a bit hard to read, but the section to the north is obviously the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor. And then we have a section going to the Eastern Shore over to Howrah, and then a section running south to Blackmans Bay. And that effectively is the bus rapid transit network that the state government is thinking about.
And sorry, that will be at that next meeting that restarting, is that correct?
Sorry,
that next meeting, is that when they're going to?
No, that's only at a very junior level. That next meeting is just going to be about again getting the officers of Glenorchy, Hobart, and Department of State Growth together to talk about, okay, what are the next steps in the project. So Department of State Growth has its own transport planner working, I think, pretty much full time on the transit solution. So they have got a huge amount of work to do to plan this in great detail and get take something, a much bigger bid for funding. As we said, it's going to be over $500 million. So that piece of work is going to be a major piece of work, largely going to be state talking to federal about what needs to happen. I think I've here we go. No. So this is a bit in closer detail, so the proposal is for a new rapid bus network, and I think it was about 44 kilometres of network with 3 routes and around about, I think it was 20 to 30 vehicles in terms of the preliminary planning. But they're talking faster and more direct services between the CBDs and along key corridors to the north, east and south to encourage urban renewal. And there would need to be new infrastructure as part of this network in terms of dedicated bus lanes, intersection priority, bus stops and stations. And the advantage of the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor, of course, is we've got a dedicated route that can be used without disrupting. Well, obviously there's the cross connections that need to be worked through, but we don't need to be disrupting other road users along that corridor, if I can put it that way. In terms of the timing, so Peter, this is answering that question, which is they've
they've kind of vagued it out a bit from the original within between 5 and 10 years of 2019. They're now talking about 3 phases. The first being planning and delivery, the second one being delivery, and the third one being delivery. And they say that these are the timelines for the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor activation. But funnily enough, the same timelines exist for the Southern and Eastern Corridor activations as well. So I guess my first thought when I saw that was, I'm concerned about how this dispersal of effort is going to impact on the Northern Suburbs Corridor as being the first mooted initiative here. But the correspondence we've had so far is state growth is still looking to prioritise. They've got to start first somewhere, and I think they're still looking at this stage to prioritise the northern part of this broader corridor.
Should we buy on the pick? Because it seems to be a very long drawn out process,
Yeah.
10 years. For earliest completion, I'd say double it, we might be in the ballpark.
Yeah. So this is in the Keeping Hobart Moving plan, which is a draft at this stage. It's been out for public consultation. My understanding is that they're looking to try and take it to Cabinet by the end of this year. I don't know whether that's secret information that I've let out, but so I think that it may well be that there's more specificity in the ultimate version of this, because there would have been some consultation, some more development. But at this stage, it's a fairly vague timeline. Having said that, we also have to recognise we're talking about a lot of funding being sought, and they probably trying to provide a bit of wriggle room on the way through.
Well, there's no mention about the analogy with say the ferry service. They seem to be pushing that very hard, and this is the least amount.
Well, that's another story, but I can come back to that if I put in questions, perhaps.
All right.
Okay, the land use planning side of things. So we've looked at the transport, and the importance about land use planning side of things is this is where the real value creation happens, because we can start getting more people living closer to services, which is great both for more people living a more convenient life. It's great for bringing economic activity. It's also great from a reduced transport emissions point of view. So there are a number of positives for achieving this, and this is the real benefit for our city out of the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor. The good news about it is that it's a relatively modest spend to do the work towards this compared to the big bucks that they're talking for the transport solution. But we're talking about a budget of already from the state government of 500,000 towards land use change along the corridor. A growth strategy has been prepared. As I mentioned before, it had a very long progress from finalisation to release, shall we say, but it is now released. It's fair to say it's very high level and insufficient to make the corridor development ready, because ultimately we need to change planning scheme rules to be able to make it happen. To that end, though, council hasn't been sitting on its hands, and our planners have introduced specific area plans for the Northern Apartments Corridor and the Principal Activity Centre, which included apartment development standards which could be used in the Northern Suburbs Transit Corridor. So we've already, if you like, pioneered and brought into our planning scheme apartment provisions that could be translated over to the corridor in some way, shape or form. And as I mentioned before, the aim is to trigger a new working group in the near future to look at this. I mentioned earlier the regional land use strategy. This is currently under review, but you can see the redlined areas, both from Hobart CBD through to Glenorchy and also out of Claremont. These indicate areas of increased densification being sought, which effectively align to the former rail corridor and part of what is now the current intended corridor. And I mentioned the growth strategy before. This is it. This is the document. It says November 2023, released in April 2024. What you'll see is, as I said, this is obviously there's more detail than this, but I thought this encapsulates the process that they proposed to move forward with activation of land use along the corridor for effectively for local governments to invest in, they're showing street trees as an example, but investing in amenity along the corridor, so to lift, provide investment to lift the corridor in advance of development. Then to look at development that is transit oriented. We'll look at that a little bit more in a bit more detail in a minute. To encourage early movers, so potentially for state and local government who have land holdings along the corridor to potentially be first movers, along with potentially other land in large consolidated sites in private ownership. And then to look at creating new housing and jobs at every stage. So they're not seeing this being something that is done in one fell swoop. It's something that would happen in different stages. And finally, managing the phasing between the stages. And that's really about making sure that we don't allow ad hoc development further out on the corridor that might interfere with what is the ultimate plan. So here's the corridor. As I mentioned, the originally conceived corridor, when it was first being discussed back in the early days of that timeline, we had a corridor that is stretched from Macquarie Point all the way out to the Bridgewater Bridge, pretty much, out to Granton. And what we've now got in the growth strategy is a stage 1 corridor between Glenorchy and Newtown. I mentioned the condition survey that had taken place by GHD, which identified issues with some bridges, identified issues with the rail line, the ballast, the spatial configuration, a whole range of issues with the existing corridor. So essentially they've pulled the corridor back to this at stage 1, just being between Glenorchy and Newtown. The other interesting thing you'll see on that arrow is that they're showing, if you look at where the green splodge is at the bottom of the picture, that's the domain, and you can see that instead of the corridor following the riverside, the rail line, it's actually shown following the other side of the domain. So not 100% sure what the plans are there, but I believe there are some constraints on the river side of the domain in terms of the corridor. They've also provided some indicative station locations. So they, yes, the one at Glenorchy's straddling the road rather than the corridor, but essentially they're suggesting, without looking at these, as I say, they're indicative, they're talking about stations at Glenorchy, Showgrounds, Derwent Park, Moona and Newtown. This is all indicative, so potentially subject to change. But why it's important really is because we need to look at, if you take that blue dot there, treat that as being one of the station locations, then the concept of transit-oriented development is really that you try and encourage more development to occur within walkable distance of the transit stop, so that in theory people can have more people can have easier access to public transport. And a 400 metres walkable distance is generally considered to be a 5-minute average walkable distance, and 800 a 10-minute walkable distance from the transit stop. So if we overlay that over the corridor and those proposed station locations, what we can see is effectively a corridor that we need to plan for that's essentially stretching between the Brooker Highway and significantly over the other side of Main Road. And there are a lot of questions to ask with land use change. So where are we going to change the land use? What are the station locations? We need to confirm those. And what density do we want to develop? What infrastructure do we require? And what land use change is proposed? For example, what are we going to do around, there's some suggestion, well, just get rid of Derwent Park and move all of that industrial somewhere else. Well, I think we need to think very carefully about that sort of change. It's a sort of change that I guess gets into the minds of people in state government offices sometimes that we need to guard against. We have to get real about the importance of jobs to Glenorchy, but we also need to look at real opportunities. What are the opportunities for beneficial development along the corridor? And what's the impact on surrounding land uses if we do change some of these land uses? What's the impact on our surrounding transport network? So what do we need to do in terms of the treatments of intersections with Derwent Park Road, Albert Road, Hopkins Street, etc. And is the land capable of the development? So I mentioned before land hazards. We need to look at site contamination. We need to look at flooding risk and all those sorts of things and make sure we're building for the future. And what existing values do we need to protect? Front of mind for me is the soldier settler housing. We've mentioned in Perron Avenue, and also Hamill Street, Amiens Avenue. Yep. Those sorts of areas are important to our city, important to the story of our city. Even areas like Johnston Street, which are probably, you'd say, 1890s housing. We don't want to be in a situation where we're flushing our heritage values away. We need to be doing this in the right way. So, there's a fair bit of work to be done to A, fully identify those values, but B, and all of these other things, a fair bit of investigation to be done before we can really identify the best way of approaching it.
I'm really pleased for you, Mayor, that the CEO's mentioned that, because honestly, I could take a lot of people in a car and just take around just how historical, if you've been to and been fortunate enough to go to Anzac and just see, I didn't know myself that the street that my grandfather was born in Hamill Street and those areas, that's actually marked as spots of where there was battles and whatever. Right. And going over the other side, you're talking about when I was a little boy, the young families that came out there and how hard they worked, crikey. You wouldn't want to lose that as well. So I think sometimes, like you just said, CEO, they need a jolt just to see the reflection of just how important this historical stuff is.
And the other point I wanted to make was that changing planning controls is not easy. So it really does, there is quite a rigorous process to change the planning scheme through the Tasmanian Planning Commission, including representation rights, which is quite appropriate. So to do this, there's a lot of work to be done to get the planning scheme ready to do that. But that's only two of the dimensions. The other dimension is change management. And if we have a look, all I've done here is overlaid our zoning map with the section of the corridor we're talking about. And what you can see is there's a lot of different colours there, and a lot of different colours essentially means we've got a lot of different land uses, a lot of complexity, a lot of different landowner interests, and there's going to need to be really good and ongoing communications and stakeholder management to work through this process. I I can really recall we did a main road corridor master plan quite some years ago now, and I remember people looking at the draft and saying, looking at diagrams and saying, what they're changing, they're going to change my property. And it was just an artist's interpretation. You have to be so careful with what you do because people don't understand what the limits of council's power. The council's power is quite limited. We need to be very careful and take people on a journey and listen to people about this process. And it's not something we can push to one side and just focus on the technical. We actually have to be talking to people about this. And it's, as I say, thousands of affected properties within this corridor. And I think timing is everything as well. We need to recognise that we need those three elements of land use, transport and change management to be in sync. The reason why that is the case is because if we allow, let's say we go off and do a whole lot of work because it's cheaper than the millions that they're going to need for the transport solution. If we go off and spend hundreds of thousands on land use, we could come up with the best plan in the world, and we might even do some change management at the same time. But if we're out of sync with the transport solution, then by the time the transport solution comes in, what we've done will have been past its use-by date, people will have moved on. It's all got to happen in a coordinated manner, which I think is the key issue to get across to, particularly the state government. And also the important thing, and I've taken this quote out of the growth strategy, the transport investment is the single biggest driver of development and the most significant growth will occur following the corridor's activation. So the point I'm making there is it is that investment in the transport solution which is going to catalyse the potential for development along the corridor. It's not going to be us changing things in the planning scheme. We've done that in the past. We've changed things in the planning scheme. We allowed shop top housing in the 1994 planning scheme. Haven't seen a lot of that happen. So changing some planning rules doesn't cut it, I'm afraid. It takes a whole lot of effort on a whole lot of fronts to achieve things. And that's it, Mayor. Are there any questions?
Just how high is your blood pressure? This is an extraordinary saga, and what a shame we haven't presented this to Cabinet, because I think they'd be extremely embarrassed at the waste, the lack of opportunity, the sheer obfuscation of this, and as you referred to it, this dispersal of effort. Wow, there have been plans about plans about plans. I know the last one I read, I came into your office hysterical, saying what? They want us to plant plants and do street art and not get on with any of the planning. It was extraordinary. So I think your summing up is just going on to show that when you think of the cost of all of those reports, how extraordinary this is, and now it's being, instead of say doing the southern suburbs transit corridor and testing it, they're going to wing it out to other suburbs with less money and hope and prayer. I mean, this is extraordinary because we should have had a solution from Granton, at least to Macquarie Point. That's what we were all believing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alderman Snow.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. That was a good presentation too, CEO. The couple of questions I just want to ask is that I'm not an engineer and I'm not a planner, but, I get on my bike and I go walking and I go up and down that stretch so much. And I can imagine what can be done in certain areas, whatever, with some planning change, whatever. Why can't these other people just get on the same bus and just look and see and try it out in some areas? So I suppose I'm just throwing it up there. I'm just finding the frustration. And when you stop and just think of what, especially I'm looking around that Moona area, what it can do for Mooners is extraordinary. Absolutely. There is land available there, and I just can't believe economists and other people and transport engineers are missing out on this. But I just wanted to say that comment. What I was going to ask, Mayor, is that in relation to the current situation with the railway tracks that are down, right, the last one, how long can they be down? People ask me every day how long they can be down for, because they say, look, there's a health issue there and whatever, and I go into Google and whatever, but how long can they be there? They're saying there's a maintenance issue and all this, and I can't answer it.
This has been a major bone of contention, I think, with the rail, the groups that have supported light rail in the past as well. I guess their argument has been it's unnecessary to rip up the rail. There's perfectly good rail in place. What State Growth says is no. Part of some of these studies have said no, the rail isn't up to standard. They also talk to the gauge. It's not a standard gauge, but then the light rail people say, well, yes, but there are light rail systems around the world that can operate on a non-standard gauge. So there's arguments backwards and forwards, but I guess the position from Department of State Growth would be that ultimately the rail needs to be removed. The ballast is potentially contaminated by, I think rail started in about 1878. So, by all of those years of either coal or other petrochemicals contaminating the ballast along the way. So my recollection of the initial proposal for this is that effectively we create, the rail is removed, the ballast is removed, there's a concrete, heavy duty concrete pad that is poured along the corridor, and then that the bus rapid transit vehicles can then run along the corridor on that concrete slab, if you like. There's also been suggestions in the past out of Department of State Growth that, well, if it's a kind of no regrets approach, because they say if we got to the future and there was enough density starting to build along that corridor, then potentially you could upgrade to light rail and actually reinstate rail along the slab that's created.
So, sorry, you've got a follow-up?
Just last one was, throughout the whole thing, CEO, it wasn't mentioned, and there's nothing on you, but how do we get the people to the stadium if things are going to be cut off, or we're not having any form of track coming around on the water's edge around that part? Where does that all come together? Where does the stadium and the government's view on this line all come together? Because I can't tell anybody. People ask me, and I just say, well, I give them the phone number of where to go. But how come nobody mentions that?
Through me, it's above my pay grade.
All right. Oh, you've answered it. Okay.
Thank you. We have Alderton.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me, Mayor?
Yes, I can.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, CEO. I've stayed and travelled on similar technologies on the mainland, rapid bus. They're absolutely brilliant. But my question is, if we're planning to have, which I think is great, we're planning to have, high density housing, et cetera, along this corridor. If we follow along the lines of what they've done in mainland states, there needs to be, not along the entire corridor, of course, but there'll be places where there'll need to be some sort of sound barriers, because these things, trust me, in confined spaces along narrow corridors, they're not quiet. They make nearly as much noise as a light rail. And who's going to foot the bill? So if there's high density housing there, what's the expectation? Do we know who's going to foot the bill for the sound walls and the sound deadening? Would State Growth be expecting local councils to pick up that tab, or is that going to come as part of the cost when State Growth design the actual rapid bus network corridor?
CEO.
First of all, I'd just say I don't think we're talking in a Hobart context about high density, like, that sort of high-rise type apartments. We're talking potentially some multi-storey apartments, but not, we're not talking, your Sydneys or your Melbournes or your Brisbanes type density. We're talking about a more modest increase in density than that. I would imagine that's got to be part of the design of the transport solution. When you look at the work that is done along, say, subdivisions along the Northern Outlet now, there are occasionally situations where acoustic protection has to be built into it. So I would imagine it's definitely a factor that would need to be considered. It's probably part of the more detailed design and development process.
Right, but as a council, we'd obviously be bringing that to someone like States Growth attention, that our expectation would be that they would be responsible for the acoustic protection that would be required in sections of the rapid transport network. Obviously, I mean, even CEO low density 3-story, 4-story housing is going to need some sort of acoustic protection.
Through there, that may well be the case, but I don't know who would pay. I think it would depend on the circumstances.
Right, thank you. It just concerns me that, each individual council along the corridor could end up with a nice big bill here.
Thank you, Shane. Deputy.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
I think I mentioned this before, a long time ago. I was growing up in Adelaide and seeing the O-Bahn. So the O-Bahn, for those who don't necessarily understand, is basically effectively rapid bus. Buses travel the road, they get onto tracks, they run through the suburbs into the city. That changed Adelaide forever. And I was only a kid at that stage, but it was enabled people from the suburbs to be able to get into the city within 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So this is something that I've always sort of flagged and gone, it's a similar kind of project. So, and I was thinking about it just then, about how that was brought forward. So that was brought forward through, it was piece by piece. So they did one piece and activated it really well, and then they built another piece and then another piece. So I know that I'd love to see it from here to Granton and into the city, but I think if this is a small piece that can begin something, I think it's a good thing. And I think nothing is worse than not something. So if we see something here, if State Growth can kind of potentially test this out, effectively see the scale of how it works, and then add on the connections later, it's something. So, and it helps then enable the medium residential housing and all that sort of scale. And fingers, if they've got the stadium in the city as well, that will happen. The connection to that will then be a next piece. So I see. As much as I'd love to see it all done straight away, I think if they're going to have a small piece done, I'll say a small piece, it's not really, but of the small piece of the bigger picture, I think, it's better than what they've currently got. So I guess that wasn't necessarily a question, more a comment.
Well, no, thank you for sharing your thoughts. That's just as good. Thank you. Can I just finish with the elected members and then I'll get George? Any other elected member want to ask a question? No? Mr. Burrows.
I'm going to make myself probably pretty unpopular with just about everybody here. But let me start off by saying I have academic qualifications in transport administration and transport geography. And Hobart Town, for better or worse, is a terrible example of how a city is being built, but it had no alternative. So trying to design transport relative to, particularly public transport, relative to our geography is very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult. Very difficult means very expensive, lots of disruptions, and if the wrong decisions are made, it can be a costly error because you have to undo that and start with potentially and hopefully a better solution. Having said that, this particular issue has sadly a long political bias to it, where it's been used by politicians for their own personal advantage. It's been used by pressure groups for similar reasons. In the meantime, whatever it is, 15 years or so, the area's laid fallow. It's become, as I call it, a feral track for feral human animals, feral native animals, and feral weeds to spread up and down. Other cities, such as New York or Sydney, where bits of rail infrastructure have been become redundant, have used it in short-term ways, which leaves the facility potentially available for future development, but at least enables it to have safe and welcoming public access. So I'll go off that on now onto this. I think the plan that they've shown there is potentially a disaster for Glenorchy, absolute disaster, because all the expenditure will happen in Glenorchy's section mainly. It'll lead nowhere and it'll come from nowhere. That means it'll go nowhere. Going to the stadium, that's always been an issue that people like myself have identified. Where are these people going to stay? And if this transit line is so important to get those people from the northern suburbs, where the hell are they going to be staying in the northern suburbs? There's bugger all reasonable quality accommodation in the northern suburbs. So there are all of these facts that are either wrong or being totally ignored at the expense of Glenorchy. Now come back to the fact that the area has been ignored. The sections of it has been through Glenorchy city proper, could be opened up at least for recreational facilities in the short term, would not stop any of this planning. But I really believe that we have to be extremely careful of this. It is driven by academic policy wonks that have no respect for, little respect for people's individual rights. The land value uptake, for instance, is an amazing academic concept that if anybody is unfortunate enough to own property along that corridor, suddenly is going to find that they have to give hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands at least, for the government to develop something which they probably won't like. And yet, if they want to move out quickly, it's going to reduce the resale value of their property. All of these things just don't seem to be in any way considered here. And I think as a citizen, having suffered bad government planning, I lived at Granton for over 50 years, suffered one lot of compulsory acquisition, the threat of another lot of compulsory acquisition, and therefore was finally driven out by exactly what's happening here, changing plans. That plan was 20 years in development, and every time anybody looked at it was a changed plan. So the citizens living in that area, me included, were in a bit of a dream and caught very, very flat-footed right at the end. This is what will happen to a lot of individuals, landowners, but worse still, what's going to happen to the remaining bit, and we don't have a lot, of commercial industry in downtown Glenorchy, a vital part of our rate base, a vital part of our commercial undertakings. And that leaves aside this whole issue that existed with trains, but will exist with buses at the same, the disruption to the traffic which crosses between Main Road Glenorchy and the Brooker Highway. How they're going to handle that with the train / now a bus having priority, which means potential hold-ups and, worse still, potential significant accidents if anything goes wrong. I don't apologise for my comments, but I really do believe that as councillors, you have to consider very carefully this, because especially with the plan that they've presented there, where Glenorchy is going to have to be involved and make decisions around the plan, which I think long term won't come to pass. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an interesting perspective, and I suspect we're not cross with you. Yeah, I don't know what the solution is. Does anyone have any further questions? Oh, sorry, Rowena.
Yeah. In recent times, the cost of our metro buses has changed significantly cheaper, and I have now started using the bus to travel to CBD. There is a 10-minute bus service that goes from our interchange into the city and then across to Rosny, which I now use quite frequently. I find spots to go and park and then ride. So this 10-minute service, I think, is an indication of a positive indication of why developing a bus service along the route would be beneficial. Does this keeping Hobart moving look at what because these changes, the 10-minute service hasn't always been there. Is that part of keeping moving Hobart, or could that be used as an indication? Some of the development could start now with this 10-minute service. If you're within walking distance to the 10-minute service, there's an added benefit. Is that in the keeping moving plan?
Through there. Well, I would say that the high, I think they call it the high frequency transport corridor. I think that's what Metro refers to. Alderman will correct me if I'm wrong on that, but there is a recognition it's the most frequently used transport corridor for public transport within Tasmania at the moment. The other comment I'd make is that when we were looking at the interim land use planning strategy in around about probably 12, 14 years ago, we also recognised the fact that the former rail line, let's call it, and Main Road are almost a couplet, particularly through this section of the city. So there's not a lot of distance between the two corridors. So in effect, some of the stuff around increasing density could be done, reliant on Main Road as the spine as well. So there's another option. I know that we've had over years some suggestions around bus priority measures along Main Road at a couple of points, and I remember council has considered those in the past. Near the Metro interchange or Metro headquarters, near the intersection of Derwent Park Road, Springfield Avenue, and Main Road, and also through particularly around Albert Road. Some proposals for changes to intersection treatments to make that corridor flow even better. I'm not sure that I'm answering your question, but I guess there is the ability just to consider using the Main Road corridor for that purpose. The benefit, I think, of a dedicated corridor was that you can get you can make that even more efficient. But as Mr. Burrows says, it is headless at the moment in the sense that the corridor doesn't lead anywhere. The advantage of one of the reasons why the government is preferring rapid bus transit is that it can come on and off the network. So it can come off this section and then go through the regular road network. So there's a bit more flexibility than if it was purely a light rail. Am I answering? I'll just check if I answered the question.
Sorry, Rowena?
Yes, so it really was was this 10-minute service stage one of moving, or it's something that Metro just decided to try?
2013.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's that well planned. So I think Metro basically Metro is now a transport provider that works to a state government contract, if you like. So there are other bus providers as well in the system, in the statewide and even in Great Hobart. So Metro is more really a company that provides public transport services rather than being what they potentially used to be pre-corporatisation. They were more of a public good. Now they provide the bus services. But so this is more a Department of State growth thing rather than a Metro thing.
Thank you. George, did you want to add something?
Yes, a couple of issues that reinforce this. Excuse me, sorry. We are talking about groups with vested interests, the light rail people, the traditional rail people, and Metro itself to a certain extent. There are other alternatives which tend to get forgotten, and one that I've advocated for quite some time has been urban cable cars. They're an infrastructure that can be put into place along the main thoroughfares at very little cost and hardly any interruption to traffic, and they can pick up the main commuter routes that you would be talking about. And they have the advantage of taking the buses off the main commuter routes. The other that we have to consider, and why I'm concerned about this, is that there's this concentration on this northern suburbs one to the disadvantage of the southern beaches and the eastern shore, where, I know this is a bit negative about Glenorchy, but it's not meant to be. That's where the major growth centres are currently at the moment. And those people will be seeing this as money that should be spent on better access for them. One of the big difficulties we have of not having a greater Hobart Council, maybe it should be a greater Glenorchy Council, but these are the issues, and I think there's unfortunately too much politics, small groups of vested interests, either government or private, and not enough appropriate studies that will back up much of the results that have been put forward. And one final thing, fast transport for public transport is a great thing, but it does mean that you have to reduce the number of stops, which means that you don't give as good a service. And that's a decision that Metro made a few years ago to try out. That's why they have the fast service. And they immediately had major complaints because a lot of stops had to be taken out of the issue. And that's a practical situation that's no solution to.
Thank you. Any further discussion by elected officials? No. Okay. I think this is reminiscent for me of, I went to one of the open house meetings the other night, and it was about is housing a right? And there were some very learned people who were speaking, and they came up with so many novel, innovative, cost-effective solutions to house a greater number of people. But my question to the audience was, what is the opportunity cost of not doing this? We've had a decade of not building the adequate number of houses, which creates poverty and dysfunction on a greater level and exposes the hospital system, police system, everything else to dysfunction, and kids fall out of school. And again, Tony, you said these reports started in 2007. That is 17 years that we have not been able to get enough experts in a room to make a decision of any sort, whether it's right or wrong, George. No decision is a waste of money as well. And I think this is appalling. Obviously, we would like Glenorchy to be a growth centre, but I can assure everyone that the 4 mayors of Hobart, Glenorchy, Clarence and Kingborough meet regularly, and the CEOs of, including Brighton and Sorrel and other councils, also meet regularly, and this is just about always on the agenda. And so what I'd like to send a very strong message to the government is, let's do it. Let's do something and do our best, because I cannot explain the significant waste and dysfunction and the flow on about getting more people into more houses and getting them to jobs and just making everything much more efficient. It's such a travesty. Well, thank you. I want to thank everyone online and our guests for turning up and joining us for our open council meeting. I do hope we see you as regular guests. We'd love to see your faces more often. And thank you for sharing your expertise. We do appreciate that. And now we're bringing our open council meeting to a close. But I hope you enjoyed tonight's session. Thank you.
Honey?
It's very good, Tony.